So the final presentation is by Haruka Fukushima, then Plesniak and Daisuke. The first one is Haruka Fukushima. So the title is Matrix and Relativity Crossover from the Federal Individual and Experimental Investigation. So please start.
Haruka Fukushima from Fukushima University. Today, Daniel Plesniak from Seoul National University will also join online with me in this talk. And we would like to talk about our experiments about the crossover phenomenon. I will start by talking about the overview of our study. In this talk, we will argue that two synthetic configurations, matrix big crossover and relative big crossover, are fundamentally different. Sentence 1, his mother loves every boy, and sentence 2, every boy whom his mother loves are similar in that his mother corresponds to a subject and every boy corresponds to an object. But the question is whether both configuration constrain interpretation in the same way. First studies have some conflicting evidence about these issues. We think this is partially because speakers have different judgments on types of sentences. We used the language property science LFS experimental methodology pioneered by Hoji 2015 and 2022 to address this issue. But first, let me talk a bit more about big crossover WCO. WCO effects relate to an inability to accept a particular reading, such as bound variable, anaphora, EVA reading. For example, in sentence 3, every boy loves his mother, not that WCO case. It's possible to have an interpretation given the figure, such as every boy loves his own mother. This interpretation is called BBA readings. Readings like BBA are often said to require the binder to be structurally higher than the binding. In this talk, we are not too concerned about which formalism is used. We will talk about structure height for convenience. Real behavior can be captured here, other formalisms as well. Proceed now. Sentence 1, his mother loves every boy. The binding is his, is in the subject position, and binder every boy is in object position. So the binder is not higher than the binding. This generally makes BBA reading difficult or impossible to accept. Transposing sentence 1, his mother loves every boy, and sentence 3, every boy loves his mother, to a relatively close context. We can obtain sentence 2, every boy whom his mother loves, and sentence 4, every boy who loves his mother. As noted, it is generally said that BBA reading is impossible in sentence 1, his mother loves every boy, and possible in sentence 3, every boy loves his mother. But a lot of claims have been made about cases like sentence 2, every boy whom his mother loves, and sentence 4, every boy whom his mother loves his mother. To give a couple examples, Spear 1986 claimed that matrix SVO-BBA and relative SVO-BBA are both acceptable, while matrix WCO-BBA and relative WCO-BBA readings are not. On the other hand, Bekki 2021's detailed theory predicts that both relative SVO-BBA and relative WCO-BBA are acceptable in contrast to matrix WCO-BBA, and correctness is this predictions is an empirical matter. As noted, this question is complicated by judgment variation. Indeed, matrix WCO is sometimes acceptable to some individuals, as has been repeatedly noted in the literature. We use the Hodges and the Best methodology and conduct individual level analysis that diagnose the presence or absence of factors that lead to different BBA judgment patterns. It has proven highly effective in past studies. In particular, these studies have been able to diagnose which individuals will or will not demonstrate matrix WC effects based on their judgments about other types of interpretations, such as correspondence and distributed reading. When we apply this method to relative WCO, we find our claim that relative WCO at different stages from matrix WCO seems to be well supported. Even without our individual level analysis, it's clear that relative WCO is almost always accepted, whereas matrix WCO is frequently
I don't know if anyone can hear me. I see the video of the video. So if people can hear me, I guess I'll just talk. In the sake of time, I'll try to go somewhat quickly through this and we can return to some of the issues in the question section. This is kind of a philosophical overview of what is, in some sense, really a book. It's an actual book that we've published, but I want to quickly overview it. Next slide, if you can hear me. So the availability of readings like BVA, we contend, is affected by multiple factors. And these factors vary in strength across individuals and indeed across the same individual at different times. There are multiple sources, separate sources, that can all achieve BVA readings. And the availability of these different sources depends on a variety of formal and non-formal factors, which are connected to the sentences and to the cognitive states and mental representations of the people making the judgments. So because of all this variation, we can't have a strict notion of this is possible, this is impossible in an abstract sense. But what we can have a sense of is whether a particular individual at a particular time can or cannot interpret a certain sentence in a certain way. Next. So now a common concern, which is often raised, is whether or not individuals can ever truly not accept a potential interpretation of a sentence in a categorical sense. That is, when people say, well, I don't accept this, is that really reliable? Can we really do kind of scientific investigation based on people's intuitions? And what I and Hajime Hoji and others have argued is that, yes, they are reliable, at least in a certain sense. So what we've seen are these correlational or implicational patterns in people's judgments. So if we look at 5, which is his student praised John with a reading that his is John, that's a co-referential reading. And 6, 2 students praised every teacher with the reading that there are 2 different students who praise each teacher. That's a distributive reading. The people who reject these readings, and some people accept them, some people don't accept them, but the people who reject them consistently don't accept weak crossover BVA, like in 7, his student praised every teacher. Some people do accept weak crossover BVA, but those people either accept coreference in 5 or distributive reading in 6 or both. Next slide. Now, to make these correlations reliable, we have to check various things. We have to check if we're doing a online experiment, whether people are paying attention and understand our questions. And we also have to check whether they are accepting distributive readings coreference at all, right? Someone who never accepts distributive readings in any case, their rejection of distributive readings is not meaningful in one particular sentence type. But so overall, if participants cannot accept coreference and distributive readings in equivalent sentences, they cannot accept matrix weak crossover BVA readings. And this correlation has been demonstrated repeatedly across multiple languages, multiple constructions. It's not just weak crossover, it's not just English. Next. 2 important things to note. As I kind of said, there's no sense in which either accepting or rejecting certain sentences is the right judgment. Even linguists disagree. I accept all these interpretations. Some of them reject, some people reject all of them. And further, these judgments are highly dependent on the highlighted elements. So his, every teacher. If we switch, say, every to a different quantifier, people's judgments change. But they change systematically across the different sentence types. Next. Because of the denial of absolute unacceptability, the LFS methodology takes individuals as its focus of analysis. So this correlation holds on an individual level, and it's tied, as I said, to the choice of binder and bindee, and modulating these factors has consistent implicational consequences. And again, note that his is shared in coreference in BVA, and every teacher is shared in DR and BVA. Next. And so what we do, so since these various factors are known to interfere with specific structural effects like WCO, we exploit the fact that these factors have similar effects for one individual across different readings. So for example, if an individual can't get an inverse scope DR, which is what 6 is trying to get, then whatever factor permutes things so that inverse scope readings become possible, apparently that isn't available for that person at that time with this choice of quantifier. And so that can't interfere with the WCO structure and won't be able to secretly give them WCO BVA acceptance. Next. And so we take cases in which no interfering factors are diagnosed and use those as the ideal cases for testing the effects of a given structure, like the WCO configuration. And in mass online surveys, this often means that we can assign maximum significance to the judgments of just a small subset of the participants. However, among those participants, the responses are expected to be universally and categorically in line with the relevant predictions if and only if the hypotheses and questions are correct. Next. So back to Haruka to talk about our specific experiment.
Yeah, now I'd like to talk about the implementation of our experiments. About this work, we followed the basic design of previous experiments and expanded to deal with both matrix and relative cases. In the experiment, we asked participants whether relational readings such as BVA, DR, and COREF, and non-relational readings are possible or not. And we used pictures to convey these readings. The goal of using relational readings is to find individuals for whom no interfering factors are diagnosed, and to analyze those individuals' BVA acceptability judgments on the construction of the interests. In the experiment, informants judged whether they could accept the pairing of given sentences and interpretations as displayed given figures. They were instructed not to judge based on plausibility or naturalness, just possibility. Informants were allowed to choose either or both interpretations, and if they felt both interpretations are impossible, they could choose neither interpretation. For example, in sentence 8, more than one school in Japan lied to its high-achieving students. The left figure shows BVA readings where more than one school lied to their own students, and the right figure shows non-BVA reading, where more than one school lied to the same students. In this case, informants might reasonably select both interpretations. This second image is an example of an experimental task about DR, distributed reading. Sentence 9, more than one school in Japan lied to 2 high-achieving students. The given interpretations is here. The left figure shows DR, where 2 students were lied to per school. And the right figure shows that non-DR, such where the same 2 students were lied to. Informants again might reasonably select both interpretations. Now, this is an example of experimental task about co-difference. About sentence 10, a school in Japan lied to its high-achieving students. Given interpretations are these figures. The left figure shows correct reading, such that a school in Japan lied to a school in Japan students. The right figure shows non-correct reading, such that a school in Japan lied to a different school students. Informants might also reasonably select both interpretations. Last, this is an example of some experiments. BVA instructions have experiments. We use this to check whether informants can understand the intended interpretations of figures. In particular, in this case, sentence 11, every school in Japan lied to the same high-achieving students. If informants paying attention and under the task, they should understand the BVA reading. The BVA picture cannot possibly can be interpretation of the sentence, so they were expected to select the bottom interpretation.
Okay, so real quick, the results. So next slide. So before we do any classification, we can already see a big gap between matrix and relative WCO. As is consistent with a lot of past experiments, matrix WCO is only accepted about 1/3 of the time. We have 35% acceptance. So most of the time it's rejected, as people often report. But if we look at relative WCO, it's accepted basically as much as the control sentences. So as much as people generally accept BVA, they accept relative WCO cases. Next. And so as I discussed, we go back one slide. Yeah, so we use these informant classification methods to make sure we're looking at people who we're most confident have no interfering factors. And so first we replicate the old experiments that have been done in the past with matrix WCO. So we classify people who passed the experiments showing that they were paying attention, understanding the questions, B, who don't have the interference from the inverse scope DR thing, and C, don't have interference from one other factor, which we diagnosed with coreference. So we have these three criteria. Next slide now. And yeah, so looking at these three criteria, which we're calling A, B, and C, if we look at people who have meet all three criteria, that's people in A, B, C, absolutely none of them accept matrix weak crossover. So this is the expected result. When you classify people, yes, a lot of people have interfering factors. Some people are borderline cases, but if you looked at the strict, very clear non-interference cases, no one accepts matrix WCO. But if we turn to relative WCO, next slide, apply the same classification. In fact, everyone accepts it. So the same criteria give you a very clear split between matrix and relative WCO. Next slide. So the data set is quite rich. We can analyze them in a lot of different ways, but we still always converge to the same result. Relative WCO is just widely accepted in a way that matrix WCO is not. And we can't do any sort of reasonable combination of factors to sort of exclude people who accept it. That seems to be a genuine judgment that English speakers have regardless of interfering factors. There is one issue, and I'll finish in just 30 seconds here, which is that in English, the relative clauses come after the head noun. So every boy who his mother loves, something like that, as opposed to in the matrix cases where it's his mother loves every boy. Precedence is known to be an interfering factor on its own. We couldn't really control for that. One possible follow-up is to do the experiment in something like Japanese, where you have the relative clause before the noun, which would get rid of that confound. So final slide. Just to finish up really quickly, relative WCO, unlike matrix WCO, is widely accepted. They don't seem to have the same sort of status. It's not that people's judgments are unreliable in general. They are very reliable once you look at classification with matrix WCO. It just doesn't eliminate relative WCO in the same way. So further work is needed, but this seems to be pointing in the direction of theories that predict different results for matrix and relative WCO, like Bekki 2021's DTS. Thank you.
Any question or comments? And if you have a question, please come up here. Now the camera is focused.
Hi. I have a question, kind of data question, and I don't know the answer to. But the types of weak crossover effects that you were looking at for relative clauses, were you mainly looking at unexproposed relative clauses? And if you expose relative clause, will you have any different effect?
Haruka, do you want to answer?
Yeah.
What's that? Oh, me answer? Yeah. Oh, yeah. So they were not extraposed. No, they were just, of the form, we were using more than one as the main quantifier. So more than one school which sued for example, sued its highest achieving students, or who its highest achieving student sued, that kind of thing. So nothing other than that. If we look at another type, we'd have to look at, what the particular hypotheses predict about it. But yeah, we have not looked at that. And depending on who you believe about what, it may indeed give a different result.
Thanks very much.
Any other question? Okay. Matsuoka-san, so please go.
Can I ask a question? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm curious. Thank you for your talk. I'm curious how you created examples. Like, was there any constraint on that, like the length of the sentence or the word used in the sentence or something like that?
Haruka, do you want to answer?
I made example was for I cannot catch first I cannot catch the last half of your question.
Okay. I'll repeat that. So I'd like to know how you constructed examples using the experiment.
Our examples is the name and total of 86 sentences and 84 sentences and it is SVOBBA is 1 and 2 and we use the verbs lie to and sue.
Okay, how did you choose the word or choose the words used in the sentence, for instance?
Yeah, and the verb is it to distributed reading for I choose the verbs in distributed reading. The first is distributed readings is easy to for to read distributed reading for so we use we choose the verbs such as distributed readings is easy to for informants.
All right. So you have chosen particular or appropriate words that call this distributed reading.
So just to jump in, just to give an
Oh.
overview of some things, I think so there were several things, as Haruka said, there was 6 sentence types. They were presented across 3 different types of interpretations, BVA, DR, and COREF. They occurred with 2 basic verb types, the 2 or verbs actually. One was lied to, one was sued. That was to get a to verb and a non-to marking verb. And when we always had the choice of in BVA and distributive, we always had more than one school. And in COREF and BVA, we always had its highest achieving students. And then we modulated for DR and COREF. For DR, there was an alternative I don't know what you call it. It's not the binder, but the equivalent of binder. We had 2 of those. And for COREF, we had 2 different, we had 2 distributees for DR and 2 reference for COREF. So we had a kind of very systematic, you kind of do all the factors and multiply out, and that gets your sentences. And the reason the sentences were in many ways very similar because we know that things like choice of predicate and things affect people's judgments. So people's judgments for one type of verb, especially things like aspect, so whether it's a progressive or resultative, for example, that seems to facilitate or block inverse scope readings for some people. So we want to keep it very consistent so that we're getting one type of reading for one type of person. And for that matter, we measured DR and coreference before checking BVA and after checking BVA. So we know sometimes people suddenly have a sort of epiphany and they're like, that's how you accept it. So if they had that, we wanted to make sure we checked after too, to make sure that they didn't, suddenly change. And then we checked BVA again and DR and coreference again. So it was all about, trying to get the people who are very consistent in their judgments. What do those very consistent people say? I don't know if that answers your question, but.
All right, I got it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, me again. Since nobody else has asking questions, I have a data question. Since you're kind of doing all this research stuff, I mean, there are lots of different types of relative clauses. There's reduced relatives. There are free relatives. Are you finding different effects with the different types of relatives? Particularly like free relatives should be much more like matrix level, because they lack a head. So
I think that would be a really interesting follow-up. I mean, we've, like I said, we've only worked on this very basic one type. I think free relatives, yes, though in a free relative, so can we get a weak crossover configuration with a free relative? I'm just trying to think here. Those, well, yeah.
It's just lifting a WH word in front, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So we could, if we look at the WH type of BVA, yes. Yeah, so that would be very interesting. I think follow-up is to see, do free relatives have, because it's possible that relative clauses may have, for example, two alternate structures some people have proposed, and one of them does induce weak crossover effects and one doesn't, and people are able to kind of check these two parses and use the one. But if maybe free relatives may only allow one, that might show an interesting pattern.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.